Hi everybody and welcome to Mod's talk about racism. My name is Amrit Matharu and I am a Models of Diversity ambassador. I'm a plus size model, radio presenter and producer, and with me today is Rachel Steeden.
Hello guys, I am Rachel and as many of you may know, I am an ambassador of Models of Diversity, and I chat to so many of you guys via the Instagram as well. So hopefully a lot of you are going to learn a lot from today. I know I am here to be educated as well, so I hope you all enjoy the conversation.
Absolutely, and we are by no means any experts to be talking about racism. However, we are joined by our special guests today, which is Leanne Levers and Roshan, who are the founders of the Dope Black Women's podcast. Ladies, do you want to explain to us who you are and tell us what's going on today?
Shan, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I'm Roshan and that's Leanne. And we're the co-founders of Dope Black Women, which isn't even just a podcast, it's actually a platform. So we're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We've got 2 WhatsApp groups. So one's for the UK, then one's international with like every country basically is in this WhatsApp group. I don't know how we've managed to do it. And essentially the platform's about uplifting, educating and creating a supportive group for Black women. So it's a safe space to talk about a lot of different issues, raising from like dating to microaggressions in the workplace. Like there's nothing's off limits basically. So yeah, that was a weird ending, but we move.
Did you want to add anything to that, Leanne?
Just to echo what Roshan said, is that we've been running for about a year and a half now. And we do have women from all over the world. And really, it's just a safe space to kind of educate and network with each other. And it's been really an empowering thing watching the women support each other and grow together and provide a space where we can talk about things from the perspective of Black women.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important that we have these spaces. And with the popularity of like the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, with everything that's gone on, 2020 has seen everybody wake up to it. That's why this chat is important to us, and we want to include sort of all races as well in this discussion about how we talk about racism. So I think the main important part to really understand is perhaps Leanne, can you can like divulge on this point. What is racism? When we hear that term racism, what does it actually mean?
So I think there is, let me frame it within the context of making the distinction between racism and prejudice. So racism is a type of prejudice, and it's essentially any sort of prejudice or discrimination or antagonistic behavior or ascription of stereotypes and misinformed ideas about a particular group of people. And those things can be positive or negative, but it's the idea that you're applying a particular uninformed piece of information or discriminatory behavior towards a person from a particular race. I think it's important to make the distinction between racism and prejudice, because racism is often framed within a systemic institutional kind of paradigm. So racism functions in an institutional way where there's a combination of systems and institutions that advantage white people but often marginalize Black people, because it is systemic and it is not just an interpersonal form of prejudice, but one that has been embedded within the system over centuries. So yeah, it's embedded in our laws, it's embedded in our institutions. There are policies that exist that advantage white people and disadvantage not just Black people, but people of color in general. But I think racism is something that is specific to Black people because of the fact that it is institutional and systemic in westernized spaces.
So I think that's like the understanding that, I think everybody needs to understand that. That's really great how you've used prejudice and racism as those like points there, and I think people don't actually often get that, and because of that, that's where we get like a lot of confusion. And Rachel, you were just talking to me before we started this chat about how people can just often be too scared, or because they don't understand that, they then ask questions, don't they?
Yeah, totally. Like a lot of the time people, because we haven't been educated correctly, or it's not being something that's spoken about, it's like swept under the carpet like so often. When we try to maybe like learn about something, maybe it can be like misinterpreted what we say, and it can come across offensive when actually we're just coming from a kind place of kindness, just because we want to learn. Especially with this year with the Black Lives Matter, I feel like it did open the conversation up quite a lot more. It was something that has been spoken about openly, and I feel like people have I'm not gonna lie, in a short space of time, because I feel like I remember doing an interview with a black model at the time, and I said, you know, is this just for brands to have the hashtag, to have the black square up for a day? Do you know what I mean? So I did feel like for quite a while we was educating more, we was asking more questions, and we was there more for our friends of colour. And then once again, obviously when I've said that friends of colour, that could come across offensive, when in like where I'm coming from, it isn't at all. Do you know what I mean? So it's just about like education and not being educated correctly, and it's just like a learning curve for all of us. Like I said when I came on here, I'm no expert, but I'm here to learn, and I'm more than willing to open up the conversation as well and talk about it, because it's so important that like all of us as all different races that we do talk about this, because obviously racism happens to all of us. Obviously it happens more to minority, but obviously a lot of us do face racism on a day-to-day basis, so it's so important that we do have this conversation. So I'm really hoping today kind of opens that up for everyone to talk about. Sorry, I told you I talk a lot.
Just to respond to that, so I think the reason that I framed it within the context of racism versus prejudice, is to make the point that not all of us experience racism. All of us experience prejudice, and all of us experience some sort of discrimination, whether it's because we're disabled or because we are of a different gender, just gender discrimination. But racism is something, because of the institutional element and because of the history and because of the laws and because of everything that we just mentioned, is something that is specific to minorities and is specific to Black people. So I think one of the things that you said, Rachel, which is great, is that you coming from a particular place, there may be things that you want to ask but can't ask. And I think for me, one of the things that I try to tell people is that you can do something that is racist and it doesn't necessarily make you a racist. Like, people make mistakes all of the time from good intentions. Within minorities, we say things to each other all the time that can be prejudiced. But I think it's important to hold your hand up. I mean, I know that I have biases against other, minorities and white people, because of the fact that I've been embedded in racism, or lived a life that has me exposed to racism. As I'm sure many white people and many of my white friends have said, I grew up in a racist society, because we all have, because the way in which our laws and our societies are set up are based on white privilege. And so I think it is very easy to understand how someone may not know better, and from that perspective. But I think it's about starting from the foundation of saying, look, I don't know better. I may have done things that are racist, but that doesn't make you a bad person necessarily, because not all racism stems from hatred. Sometimes it stems from ignorance and just not knowing better. And so I think it's about not being afraid to be labeled and having an open conversation, as we are here today, to say we all have our biases. How can we do better?
think one thing that you said, and which is what I've been educating on myself on since the Black Lives Matter movement has really come about, is because when I used to hear the term racist or racism, I would purely think that was down to the color of someone's skin, whether that was being racist to someone who's brown like me, or black or white, Chinese. I used to think it was because of the color of their skin or where they're from, not necessarily understanding how you've explained there about the sort of the institutionalization and the systems that have been put in place that was, around that. So I think that made it a little bit more clearer to me, and tried to understand a little bit more about and a lot of the words that we hear nowadays is around the privilege of, or the lack of privilege, if you are a black person or someone who isn't white. And I think that's kind of how I've started to understand this term racism now. Roshan's nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it was going back to what Rachel said earlier, actually, about, using the fact, I think you said you used people of colour in an interview and you wasn't sure how it was going to come across. But I think I feel like that's a word that is in the Black and ethnic minority groups, I'm not saying BAME, that people are still trying to like comprehend whether or not they're okay with it or not. So I feel like with that, you can get away with playing it safe and it being okay. But I think you have to just kind of be in space. You have to want to be in spaces to educate yourself, to be able to understand what's right and wrong, and then make your own judgment. Because even within the Black community, as an example, like yesterday, I heard someone say the phrase "coolie," which is basically to describe someone who's, well, I would think someone who's like West Indian, who's of like an Indian Caribbean culture background. But I also understand that I learned in like the last 2 years that the phrase "coolie" is also derogatory. So it's like people within the black community are doing the exact same thing as well. But it's about learning and then being like, okay, now I know this information. What am I then gonna do with that? Why is there noise in the background?
Yeah, it's about not being afraid to make a mistake. There are points of, as Shan just pointed out, there are points where she and I might disagree on something. And, Black people are not a monolith. Asians are not a monolith. White people are not monoliths. So I think it's okay for us to disagree on something. But I think, there are things that you just need to be open to listening to. And sometimes in order to learn something, you need to kind of make a mistake. And so saying the words or the phrase "people of color" opened up a conversation for somebody else to say to you, actually, just use the word black. If you're talking about Black people, talk about Black people. If you're talking about Asian people, talk about Asian people. But some Black people don't mind. Some Asian people don't mind being lumped together. Some people do. So I think it's just, as Shan said, just educating yourself and reading as much as possible and learning as much as possible wherever you can. But sometimes that's making a mistake.
And also, if like you're interviewing someone who is Black, then just taking like the duty of care beforehand to be like, let me educate myself on the type of person I'm interviewing. So like, if for example he's interviewing me, and if I was someone who had a lot of things online with other interviews, look at what people have said to me and how our body language was in responding to that, and then that will give you more of a safety net to know that person's okay with it. We saw that the BBC, when they were called out for using the N-word quite recently, like a few months ago, and then it transpired that the actual parent of the child, I think it was, or the family wanted them to use the N-word. Do you get what I mean? That has its own politics, but it's like in that scenario, the person they were talking to was okay with that being used. So sometimes it is on a case-by-case basis. Or the more you educate yourself and put yourself in positions and spaces to learn about these different community groups in an organic way and not tokenistic, is the more you're going to be able to be better in doing things like interviews or interacting with these groups. Because I have friends who will ask me questions and I won't think they're trying to make me feel uncomfortable or trying to make me feel different, quote unquote. But I've also been in scenarios where people have done similar things and I would class it as a microaggression because their approach wasn't nice. Their approach didn't seem like it had well intentions. Do you get what I mean? Like, you can ask someone, if you wanted to know about my braids in the morning when I was coming to work, you can find a way to do that. Or you can just Google on your phone in the same way that you'd Google to find out where the nearest shisha bar is or what bottomless brunches are on this weekend. Do you get what I mean? It's about giving that same fair level of research that you have in your entertainment lives into understanding the experience of the Black and brown people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good example there about how you said how the family on that interview wanted to use that word, and that's a great way of explaining that every scenario and situation is different within that space. So there's no, in this whole chat, all the guys that are listening, there's no like right or wrong. We are definitely not the experts. We're just people here that are trying to have this conversation and share our experiences and our thoughts. So maybe could you guys give an example about how, or tips, not that these are the official tips, but tips on how to approach certain situations? Like you gave some examples there, Roshan, about like speaking to the people, but what kind of things, how would you just say it? Like, oh, you know, am I racist if I ask you this? Like, that's a very blunt term of asking it, but essentially that's what we want to learn and know. How can someone approach someone or speak to them about it?
I think you just got to be organic. So I'm going to give you an example. I've got a really close friend who's white, and when the whole Black Lives Matter movement was going on, she didn't randomly start talking to me more. Do you get what I mean? She didn't randomly start like sending me Black Lives Matter posts or like going out of her way to do things that wasn't authentic to her. So what she did do was she messaged me and said, "Hi, you all right?" And I ignored it because I was testing it. I was thinking, I know how she normally types, but this typing's a bit different. I feel like she wants to have a conversation. So I ignored it. And then she asked me again, "Hi, you all right?" in a group of chat where everyone was Black except for her. I said, okay, the conversation's coming. And then she messaged me and she said, "Hi, Shan, I just want to say, obviously, you know I'm not racist." Of course, they have to say that first. She's like, "Obviously, you know I'm not racist, but a lot of what's been going on has allowed me to educate myself and has allowed me to understand the experiences of Black people more." And she said to me, "It's not about not being racist, it's about being anti-racist and educating people and doing more things." And I feel like for me, whatever she went on to say after that, I would have been more receptive to, because her opening message was acknowledging the fact that we face discrimination on a regular basis, and was acknowledging the fact of my experience and that she's still got more learning to do. So no matter what she said afterwards, I would have been fine with. Do you get what I mean? So I feel like you've got to be organic in it, but you also got to remember the people that you're coming to talk to. Like we're not Google. I feel like sometimes it's lazy. People will ask you questions that they can actually Google. Mm-hmm. Like, is the N-word racist? Google it. Don't ask me. Don't ask me. Do you get what I mean? And in that conversation, she actually was asking me, like, she was like, "I'm going to start doing this, that, and that. What do you think about that?" She came from my opinion. So for that, it's like, I'm seeing that she wants to learn. Do you get what I mean? Yeah.
And I guess, does that make you almost feel like when you get asked these questions, like you're acting as a spokesperson for Black people, because people ask you those questions, it can make you feel that way?
In that scenario, because she's my friend, I didn't feel like that. And I also knew from speaking to her that she wasn't just relying on me. If you remember what I said at her first opening message, I knew she had done research. So she wasn't coming to me as the first primary research. I might have been the 5th person down the line. I then knew once I'd spoken to her, she'd asked other friends. Do you get what I mean? So that's why I'm trying to say it's about being organic, and also remembering that we're not the spokespeople for all of Black people, because we're not monolithic and our experiences aren't going to be the same. So I think that when it comes to friends, so I guess the tip that I'm giving in summary is about friendships. When it comes to ask the people that you know, just make sure you're very transparent about what your intentions are at the start, rather than sugarcoating around. And also make sure you do research before asking them, because just because you have the privilege of having Black friends doesn't mean they now go answer all of your 21 questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Rachel, I know that you have been speaking to a lot of sort of the mod followers and collecting some of these questions that people do have that sometimes can be afraid to ask. And as we have our lovely panel here today, and this is what this whole conversation is all about, do you mind sharing some of those questions? And hopefully, as a group, we can all come together and sort of unpick a little bit what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm not going to say the names out because I don't know if I have permission to do so. However, here we go. So this one is like on a modelling terms. So do models from minority backgrounds feel that there is a shift in culture in the industry, or is there a lot more to be done before real change is initiated?
I think it is, and maybe Amrit, you might be best placed to speak to this, but we do have quite a few women in our group that are from the fashion industry, and actually there's a couple of women who just started a group called the Inclusive Consultancy, and they are specifically working on kind of embracing or improving diversity in fashion. And I think one of the things that they've said, Annie Clark and her business partner Anno, is that while there is an increase in models in front of the camera, there are not as many people behind the camera. And so things around, I think there is a photographer, the first Black male photographer to shoot for Vanity Fair this year.
Yeah.
And that was because Viola Davis said, I want a Black photographer. It's very rare. Many Black models will tell you that when they go on a shoot, while they'll probably be the only Black person on the set, because the photographer, the creative director, etc., are usually white. And so I think the answer to that would definitely be, there's definitely a need for wider representation of Black models, of Black disabled models, of Black plus size models. So
yeah, I'm in 100% agreement with this. Obviously Angel, the CEO of MOD, she's obviously a Black model. Well, she was a model, and that's how I found her. And she realized that it was so hard. She would have to work not 10 times harder, literally 100 times harder than, say, like a white model to get a booking. And I remember 5 years ago, I done a blog about, is the fashion industry racist? Because all I was ever seeing were models that really represented myself and didn't represent my friends. And I couldn't get my head around this, like, why wasn't they represented, And 5 years on, I'm still looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm thinking, it's changed slightly. Has it changed enough? 100% no, not at all. And after the whole Black Lives movement started, a lot of brands started to use like either Black influencers or Black models, but I've also noticed that dropping, because it's not the trend. They love to jump on a trend. And and this is definitely what Models of Diversity are doing. We're really, really pushing for models to be seen, like Black models, Asian models, like just everyone to be represented. And you're so right with behind the scenes as well. And that is even just not even in the fashion industry, in the workplaces, and I go off. I'm so sorry. I'm now going on to something else. But I did speak to a model who told me that before she changed her surname on her CV to a more like English British surname, so her job application would be seen. And I'm like, this happens. This is just absolutely unreal that this is happening in this time. I just think it's time that really people started like moving with society and just liking people and getting to know people for who they are, not based on skin color or background. I think it's absolutely crazy. So yeah, I've changed that whole question into a totally different one as well. But when it's on my heart, and I get a bit angry about it. So I had to get off.
That's because you've seen it, Rachel, and you've been in these situations. And I think a point to what you said there, Leanne, definitely about behind the scenes. So as someone who has been on the modeling side of stuff, I think that definitely we do need those people of color, whether they're Black, Asian, or from any ethnicity, to be involved in these spaces, because often I think you have to look at the end product of what these companies or modeling shoots want, and often there can be a white lens on it. So although we're picked, various different models for the representation might be there, but how authentic is it? Because
tokenism.
Yeah,
Sorry. It is tokenism. It's like, oh yeah, like come on, let's just get one in there. That's what it feels like.
Yeah,
and it should be because she's gonna look fantastic in that outfit. That's why.
Yeah,
you know, they feel they have to.
Around sort of how they'll be placed in the shoot and show that range of diversity, but actually, I think how authentic is it? I've been in places where they've said like, oh, should we just change your hair a little bit? And if that's not the real texture of my hair or how I look like as a brown Asian person, sometimes I can feel that I'm being manipulated to just be placed in to fit in with everybody else, even though I am a little bit different. And I think that's the thing that we need to perhaps see in these spaces of people who are on the boards of these divisions and stuff like that. And that like you said, Rachel, it counts in not just sort of the modeling space or in the fashion industry, but also, you know, I also work in the media, and Roshan, I'm sure you can relate as well. Like when you're working on sort of like if it's a TV or radio pitch, mainly on TV for when we see things on screen, often the people may be made to do stuff that isn't authentic to their culture or what they represent because of how they seem to appear. Roshan is smiling. God, have you got examples?
Oh, is it? Oh, she's frozen.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. So my first point is, rather than have something that's tokenistic, I'd rather not be included at all. I don't want us to be there, like this and that, and you're someone who's responsible for inclusivity and diversity. Don't use us if that's what your energy is, because we don't want you. That's the first thing. And then the second, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So even talking to someone about a creative idea that is involving a program to do with Blackness, yeah, I'm trying to be specific with my words, and they were like, oh, let's like, so basically there's the scene that we're setting up is a scene of like someone's bedroom or living room, and they're like, let's have a flag in the background of like a Jamaican flag or the Pan-African flag or something like that, and she was like, you know, to represent more of what your home looks like. And I said, I'm not gonna lie, in none of my friends' homes that are Black do we have our flag up in the house. I said, what we have up that might symbolize it's a Black home is a lot less in your face than that. I said, we might have this particular fish in the house. We might have like these beads that are very annoying that come down in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You might have like this massive great wall of china, literally different glasses or cups or mugs you're never allowed to touch, not even on Christmas Day. I was like, it's hidden things like that in a house that makes you know the person's house is Black or Black Caribbean, from my experience. I was like, I don't see people's houses with like a big Jamaica flag. So I said to him, like, you know, I get your idea. I completely get what your ethos is, but that's not something that you see us do. That's something you see white people do. When you drive down in white areas, you always see the big British flag on top of the person's house by the chimney. Like, as if when they walk out the house, we don't know they're white. Do you get what I mean? Like that, and so yeah, the tokenism there is a very big deal, and you definitely see it in the creative media spaces, because I feel like the media industry is diverse. In my experience, I would say it is diverse, but it's not diverse in leadership positions. So then, therefore, things like that will filter down. Do you get what I mean? Because if the person who's senior to you is making those sort of decisions, then you'll get content that is organic to the Black experience or whatever experience is trying to perpetuate.
Yeah, and I think something that a lot of companies have seen since Black Lives Matter have been like sort of advisory boards where people, and I personally think they're a good thing, where people from maybe those different ethnicities, cultures and backgrounds are there for, and I mean, I don't want to put like a responsibility on those people or those individuals to represent cultures, but they're there as like a soundboard for scenarios like what you've just said, Roshan, where this the director or the creative person there had this idea and went straight to you and didn't really like enunciate it properly and articulate what they meant. Whereas if they were to take it to these people that sit on these boards, they can understand what they mean and act as like advice and sort of to counsel them in understanding what you know, that may mean, like you had to explain, I don't know if that breaks any awkwardness or anything, but I just feel like then the end result can be a lot more authentic in understanding how this needs to look or feel or be, because they haven't just gone and done the thing that they think in their heads is the right way to show diversity.
Yeah, well, I think in this particular scenario, this was like my teammates. It wasn't actually someone that was more leader to me. And it was more like we was brainstorming ideas. But because it is a safe space, and because they are people who I would say are perhaps trying to be allies of the community, they were then able to ask me questions, or ask the team questions, and then get an answer back. So it goes back to what Rachel was saying before about how do you approach these questions. Like, they just asked me, do you know what I mean? They said, what do you think of this idea? And I gave them the idea. I know he wasn't trying to cause offense, but had he not asked me and then went off on his own accord, we would have got content that was just not organic. So the aim of the content is to, you know, inspire and educate Black people, but Black people aren't going to be receptive of the content. It's not going to perform well or get into mainstream if the content doesn't actually replicate them. And that goes back into the idea of having teams that are diverse, so that there's people on the teams like me that can speak up and say, oh, this is an issue, or that's an issue, or you know what, actually, I get your idea, but why don't we make it like the rug has the Pan-African colours, rather than it being an actual flag in the background? Because if it was a rug and it's something more subtle like that, it's more like ingrained in us. We will notice it and probably smile, rather than being like, why on earth is that in the background? Do you get what I mean?
Totally. Rachel, do you have any more examples there of questions?
Yeah, so obviously, because it's Black History Month, I best read this one out. Does Black History Month help reduce racism, or is it more about celebrating Blackness and racists be damned?
That's an interesting question.
It's not from me. I'm just the reader.
It's you, Rachel. It's you. Stop lying.
I'm not that clever to come up with something like that.
I think it is, well, first of all, let me also say that I think it is very interesting that the UK is the only country in the world that celebrates Black History Month in a different month than everybody else. Everywhere else in the world, we celebrate it in February. I do think that is intentional to minimize the opportunity for Black people to celebrate Black History Month, and the fact that it's somehow now being transferred into this idea of Diversity Month. Is that what it's now being called, or something like that? There was a petition. Sorry, what did you say, Rachel?
Still definitely Black History Month, but I don't know what people are trying to turn it into. What's going on?
There was a petition sometime last year to turn it into like Diversity Month, where we would celebrate all sorts of diversity within this month. And I think that was
that takes the whole point of it.
Opposed by Black people. But I think the two go hand in hand. So it is an opportunity to celebrate Blackness, but also to educate people as a way of minimizing racism. I think the two go hand in hand. I think an important part of minimizing or reducing racism is just exposing, particularly in England, is just exposing people to Black culture and having them have an opportunity to learn and embrace it for what it is, rather than what they think it is. So I think the ideas are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, do you know what? I put up a post on our Instagram to just celebrate the beginning of Black History Month, and I had quite a few comments that I didn't like from white people, and they were quite, obviously they noticed it. I'm a white person, I've posted that, but they're being rude towards me, probably thinking I was Black, I think, and I blocked them all because I'm not about that. I do not like, it is a hate crime. I don't know why people feel it's okay to write it down, because you wouldn't say it to someone's face. Yeah, I'm just not about that at all. It's all about celebrating, you know, this is the month that we're celebrating and educating. You know, we have our own history to deal with. We don't need to know about it on a post that was specifically celebrating Black History Month. And I think that's what people do need to allow. Like, it's okay to just celebrate other people's culture without having to bring your own in all the time. Do you know what I mean?
What was the post, out of interest?
It was very plain. It was literally it was just a Black History Month slogan, and then just pointing out that from obviously the 1st of October that we will be celebrating Black History Month, and that is a time to celebrate the history and everything that Black people have overcome. And yeah, I got all sorts on there and I just thought, I don't want your history lesson, mate. So I went about it. So we are a non-hate Instagram, positive vibes only. So yeah, we didn't want that on there. So yeah, and we as a charity, we've had quite a few Black women actually do videos for us as well, talking about their Black history hero and icon. So I think that's really good as well, because I've learned things by watching it, because I don't know all these things. So, you know, by us posting these things and getting in touch with people, it's just so important, because I'm learning, we're all learning all at the same time. And it's just really nice to see like the passion as well, and how it's actually helped, like people's history has helped grow them into the person that they are, like their icons from Black History Month and stuff as well. So that's why it's really important that we've actually shared about it, because obviously it's not a lot of brands or companies have really spoken up too much about Black History Month. So it's good that, as we are here, we are open conversations about everything. So I still have more questions. Oh, here we go. Can we imagine the UK ever having a Black female Prime Minister?
Wow.
I mean, I clap for the day that does happen.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
That is a stretch.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that I do not foresee it happening anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
However, it would be nice to see it happen one day.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think things like that is not even just for the representation. I think it's more about seeing such a shift, if that ever does happen, in politics and the government, for things to just feel more equal. You know, I'm not here saying that anything is racist, but to see that change happen, it for the different communities, it will feel such a, it will just, even like we will just feel included, because it feels like things are just changing in the world if that was to happen. I mean, look at the impacts that it had with America having Obama as a president.
Well, I think it's also this example or that question highlights the institutional element of racism. So there are so many reasons why we don't have a Black female prime minister in this country, or just a Black prime minister in this country. One of them is access. You know, when you look at the history of the prime ministers that we've had, they all come from certain schools. They all come from, you know, Eton or Andrews or any of those other schools. We live in a space where white men are given certain privilege because of the financial legacy of wealth that they have in their families. Whereas, you know, someone like Diane Abbott, who has been working in politics for years as a Black woman, has only ever received racism and threats to her life and being called all sorts of names. And many of the Black women in politics have experienced that, and many of the Black men who are in politics have experienced that. So there's also that additional barrier to know that if you do enter politics, this is something that you are going to be subject to, even when you're a good politician. So I think there is, you know, there's that interpersonal element, but there's also the institutional element that directly blocks people from entering into politics. And one of them is access to education, access to the network, as it were, of the powers that be, or the gatekeepers, if you want to call them that, and the fact that Black people are just not included in that space.
Yeah, I think going on from that, I think immediately I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And it's like, I would love for it to happen. But like going on to what Leanne was saying, there's so many layers. Like being black is hard, then being a black man is hard, and then being a black woman is even harder. And I feel like even if you do come from a black background and you're privileged, it's then like, do I even want to have the energy to be in those spaces, to have to be on the receiving end of racism 24/7? Like for a politician for that to happen, they're gonna have to get votes. If you saw the other day, Sainsbury's released a simple statement, like basically saying like, we're with the black people, and there was so many comments like, I'm not coming anymore, Sainsbury's, you're racist. Like all of those silly people that got angry at that one post, we've now got to get on our side. Do you get what I mean? Like we're still so far from it, unfortunately. And I think that also is like, you have to be really tough skinned to be in these places as a black person. Like when I talk to black people that have been lucky enough to go to these colleges, or that have been lucky enough to go to get access private education, for a lot of them, unfortunately, their experiences aren't pleasant. Like my mum, for example, went to a private school and she hated it. Because when you're black and you're in these predominantly white spaces, especially you're into a space that doesn't actually expect you to be there, you're not treated fairly. Your experience isn't nice. And especially growing up in that as a young person, there's a lot of things you have to deal with that your brain doesn't even know how to digest or comprehend. So immediately from birth, basically, you're not even on a journey of being able to want to have that as a career path. Do you get what I mean? Because to access the education, you already then have you already then have like an idea of what that community looks like, let alone have to do it as your full-time job to actually pay bills and enjoy.
Yeah. And your mental health has to be balanced. Like, do you enter into this? I can't imagine the level of resilience that it takes to be a black woman in politics for over 20 years and receive the level and consistency of vile hatred that people like Diana Abbott have experienced. And it can be demoralizing. And as Shan said, even just when you do have access to those spaces, my mom went to Benenden, which is a private school in London, boarding school in London, when she was in the 1950s, I think, or 1960s. And she was the only Asian person. My mom's from Sri Lanka, and she was the only brown person or person of color in the entire school. And so as a result, her experience there was very different from everyone else. And now it's great because we have these programs that are dedicated. Stormzy has gotten this scholarship to make sure that there are people that can, young people that can go to Oxford and Cambridge. We have Target Oxbridge, which is a great platform that tries to provide young black students with support to enter into, to make applications towards those schools and to help them to find placements in prestigious universities. But that's a 30-year gap, and we're still facing instances within the realm of politics where black women who try to enter into politics are, discriminated against, and not just by white people, but by anyone who is in politics that seeks to have a space that they see as being occupied by the wrong person.
Exactly thought that when we were talking about the education side of things, that I almost thought to myself, I'm going to say it, but if anyone is watching this talk that has been lucky enough to be picked by Stormzy scholarship, choose politics and help the change. Yeah, so Rachel, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, when I was deciding what to do when I was going to university, I wanted to become a journalist. Even though I had a strong passion for human rights and politics, I never imagined, it wasn't until that I was in my master's when I was in the UK that my supervisor encouraged me to do a PhD in politics, which I thought was a waste of time as a black woman, because I was like, what am I going to do with this degree? And while I'm not in politics, the realm that I'm in now, where I work around policy reform, even in Jamaica, and in the UK, no matter where I've gone, actually, because I've worked in the US, in the UK, and in the Caribbean, being a woman, and more specifically being a black woman, is definitely a disadvantage. You are overlooked, your voice is minimized, your ideas are appropriated as somebody else's, so you never get credit for the ideas that you put forth. And I'm sure this happens across all arenas, but yeah, it's definitely a barrier, because within politics, your ideas are your are your brand. You are who you know, what you purport in terms of your policies and your ideas. And if you don't get to claim them as your own, you become obsolete in many ways.
I think what you just said there is like, often we think because you know, being in these political spaces and stuff, we, as a Black person, you're not going to get anywhere because it's just you. It's not to say that, although we would love, and you know, it is important to have more Black people in politics, but it's also about changing the shift in other people's thoughts and how their behaviors are, because we need to create allies, and hopefully talks like this do make people think differently, because even if you are the only Black person in politics in your space, it would be more helpful to you as a Black person to rise if people were helping you, and they don't have to be Black. It's about changing your shift. Yeah. So I'm just sorry, that was really great, and I think such an important point to make. I'm just conscious of our time and the questions we have. Rachel, do you want to, how many questions do we have, or do you want to pick some of the key ones?
Well, I feel like there is one like good one, because we've just been kind of talking about education and stuff, so this one ties in well with it. Are teachers subconsciously racist and treat students unfairly, creating a racist environment without realizing it?
I think that encapsulates a lot of what this talk was about anyway.
Yeah.
It's a really great question to sort of end on.
Yeah.
I can see Leanne smiling, so I feel like you have things to say.
No, just to say that it goes back to, I think, what we initially started this conversation saying, is that I think we all need to understand that we all have biases and we all have prejudices. And the truth of it is that the majority of teachers in England are white. And as a result, there is an implicit bias that white people carry and may not knowingly create an environment that is not necessarily actively racist towards Black people, but as Shan said, it's about being anti-racist and providing a space for your students who are minorities, because you know what they face in the outside world. I think that, you know, there are many, there's so many women in our group who have expressed that yes, they may have had that one teacher that made a difference in their lives, but they've also had a number of teachers who told them that they would never amount to anything, that they should never try to do anything outside of music and sports because that's what Black people are good at, who have used words like half-caste to describe them. There was actually a BBC, I don't know if it was BBC, but there was actually a news report where a white teacher came on and said that she was shocked that when a young half-caste, that's the term that she used, girl came, had cut her knee on the playground, that she was amazed to realize that her skin, that her tissue underneath her skin was white or pink, because she didn't realize that Black people had white tissue and bled regular red blood underneath. And it's just, you know, it, whether it's teaching, whether it's the judiciary system, whether it's, and that's why, to go back to what Shan said, representation is so important, because you need people who can speak to those experiences and advise accordingly.
That story is just like so bizarre that anyone could ever think that. But yeah, it just goes to show that how, yeah, back to your question, Rachel, that this person was asked, it is so important to have this education and these spaces that are taught from young, which is why I hope any parents or people watching this can, you know, start to form their own ways that they're going to be able to talk to their families and their kids about race, about racism, about how we treat people as individuals and groups of people. You know, it's about respect and about the understanding and all of that stuff. Before we end, does anybody want to add to that?
Just before lockdown, I went into a couple of schools and I spoke to children, just little youngsters like my daughter's age, she's like 8. And I spoke to them all about differences and accepting your own unique differences and your friends' differences. And I showed them lots of different models from like our photo shoots, and one thing the children didn't realize as differences out of all of these models is that the models had different skin color, they did not see this. This is young children. They did not notice this at all. So to me, it highlighted to me that this is definitely like a taught behaviour, what they're maybe from home or someone, because they didn't notice the skin colour. So at what point does it come evident that there is like a divide between the children, you know, as they get older, that they won't be friends with someone because they may have curly hair, or they have darker skin or lighter skin to them, you know. And it just became really evident that the children just loved each other for who they are and for like their friendship and their personality, not because of like the skin colouring. So I really felt like it was something that is being at home, parents aren't talking about it. I talk to my daughter all the time about every type of person there is in the world, you know, and I want her to grow into an adult who is accepting of everyone regardless of skin colour, ability, and it's just so important. We have the responsibility as parents or anyone who is involved with children to shape the next generation. And I generally feel the schools, I feel they have a responsibility to be educating, you know, from a younger age about like everyone's backgrounds, the history, and that's why it's important. Like Black History Month is being spoken about in primary schools as well, because when back in the day when I was at primary school, it was just like the Romans and stuff like that we learned, you know. So I definitely think like we should all take our responsibility. If you're aunt, uncle, granddad, anyone, if you're involved with children, start that conversation at home. You know, once you get into it, it's really good. Children love it. They absolutely love talking about it. And I think it is important, if they're not instilling those qualities into your children at school, that we do it at home, because hopefully one day we'll have a world that is less judgmental and racist, and hopefully you know, we can live hand in hand being like family, you know, and that's how I feel it should be. But yeah, I just wanted to get that in there because it's on my heart so much that we need to teach our children this. Like, you know, you can feel it, and I'm like, you know, if we teach children from a young age, then what we get taught as a child, it does get instilled in us as adults. So I just wanted to get that in there.
Just to add to that, I think it's so important that we, you know, when we talk about like the education of like telling the young children and youngsters in our lives and schools, and whether that's nieces or cousins, whatever, that we tell them that, you know, what these things mean and how we should be treating others. But I also think for children of colour, me being one myself, is also, and you know, here at Mod, we are here to lift, we are known as models of diversity, so we are here to celebrate diversity and lift, you know, everybody up, whether that's curly hair, acne, marks from skin, whatever that is, whatever that means. I think as because we're talking about race here, as like a child of colour, one thing that I always like to do on my socials and my message is that if you are a child of colour, to always remember that you are not other, and you are just as worthy, and you can, because I think that's so important to know that yourself, as much as other people have a responsibility to have that in their education, in their minds, we need to always strive for like more and better. Nothing should stop us. So that's my last message. Before we go, I do want to just say a massive thank you to Rachel for sort of co-hosting this with me, and to our guests who have made this happen, Leanne and Roshan from the Dope Black Women. Thank you so much. Is there anything anyone wants to add before we go? Because it's been really helpful, and I hope that people watching this have enjoyed it as well. It's helped them.
I have got one really small thing. I just want to be really shameless, and I just want to plug this t-shirt quickly. This is one of our diversity t-shirts. So many people have been sliding in DMs about it. So this is what it looks like, and you can get them on our eBay store. Okay, and that's it.
Shan, did you want to say something?
What I was going to say was actually, it was in response to what you guys were talking about before, about the unconscious bias in in schools and things like that. Because I was going to say that we did a podcast episode for the first week of Black History Month. So not Thursday just gone, the one before. And I interviewed my nan, who's in her 60s, and my great-gran, who's in her like 80s. And we all had the same experience of being in school and teachers telling us like we wasn't going to make it or we wasn't going to do well. And I think for my nan in particular, who's in her 60s, she said that like basically everyone that she knows almost that was Black growing up was told they were going to work in Woolworths as their job when they went to their careers advisor. And I also think on that same topic of education is that a lot of Black people or people of colour can't always remember that one Black teacher they had. Do you get what I mean? And it was always the teacher that believed in them the most, or that took time out to talk to them, to educate them and to help with them. And I feel like the importance of having Black teachers or Black people in education and these authoritative figures is that there's a level of understanding that you can't get elsewhere. So a Black person who's a teacher might, for example, with me, I'm very talkative. And when I had like certain white teachers, I mean, sometimes it would be me being disruptive, of course. But I mean, there was sometimes when I wasn't being disruptive, I was bored because the work was too easy. I wasn't being challenged. Do you get what I mean? And if you're in an institution where they don't recognize that Black people can be exceptionally smart or can have quote unquote Black excellence, then they're not going to push you to do the higher grades. So I remember even I remember doing a particular subject. I know when I could have been in the express set and I wasn't. I was in set 1. And the express set meant you could do an AS level in your final year, like ahead early for college. And I remember asking my teacher, like, why can't I be in the express set? And they're like, oh, you're disruptive. And I was thinking, I'm disruptive, so I can't be in the express set. Like, what are you talking about? And it was like, I'm the reason why I end up being disruptive or being distracting in this class is because it's too easy. So if the class is an hour long, I'm finishing it in half an hour, 25 minutes, and that's no exaggeration. So it's like, of course I'm going to be disruptive. If you put me in a classroom that is full of just white people because it's the express set, I will smash it there and not be distracting anyone. So it's really important that with all these different institutions that we encourage diversity and representation of all ethnicities, but it just needs to be organic, because there's no point encouraging more Black people or brown people to get into these industries of working as a teacher to then have a Black teacher or a brown teacher that's in a bad mood every day because the first thing in the morning they got was microaggressions from their colleagues rather than a hello. Do you get what I mean? Like, in order for us to see the change that we've all spoken about and that we all want, it has to really come from all levels. So when you were talking about how you educate your daughter and, we've got to educate young people, we've also got to educate the older people. We've also got to speak out when we're at work and people are doing things out. We've got to call them out on their BS. But there's a way to do it diplomatically that isn't going to cause harm. Like, I'm not saying if a manager's being problematic in a meeting, standing up and being like, that was wrong. Like, that's not going to get change, and that's not going to get the best reaction from the person. But actually maybe being like, say, emailing the manager, can we have a conversation? And then saying, earlier on in the talk, I assume you was trying to get this across, but it actually came across like that. And maybe we should try this approach. Then you're going to get a more receptive response. And if that manager's responsive to you, which hopefully they should be because they're not racist, then we're only going to have a better workplace, So I feel like this whole conversation isn't aimed at anyone. It's not about a white issue or a Black issue or a brown issue. It genuinely isn't everyone's issue. And as long as we all put an effort in consciously every day to educate ourselves and do better, then we will see change. And if we don't all do it, then it's going to be a long time before we get that Black female politician.
I couldn't have said it any better. That was so great. Thank you, Roshan. And Leanne, would you like to, we've just got you back, would you like to say anything before we have to end again?
No, I think Roshan pretty much summed it up, to be honest. I echo everything that she said. It's just really important that we continue to educate ourselves, that this is just not a one-off conversation, and that we keep holding people accountable, holding ourselves accountable, and continuing to learn. And being, as Rachel has said many times during this conversation, it's okay to say, I don't know. So many people are afraid to be seen or be labeled as something, but you can shift. You are not, you are allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to learn. You're allowed to grow. We are all, part on this journey of self-development, and part of that is making mistakes and learning and doing better because you know better.
And I think I'm happy for, I'm sure Leanne will be too. I didn't even ask her, I'm happy for us too. But I think, you know, some of the questions that you've asked that haven't been answered, when this goes up, we can put an answer box on our Instagram and people can direct their questions to them, we can answer them. Because I feel like, you know, it's easy to say ask people, but I imagine it can be quite daunting. And I feel like I'm privileged that I have a safe space of Black women that I can ask questions to learn. Like me and Leanne was talking the other day about how cathartic this process has been and how much growth you both had from running Dope Black Women. And for me, the big part of that, or the main part of that, is being around Black people that I can ask questions to without feeling like I'm going to be judged or criticised. So even if it's things that, like, as a Black girl I should know, I can ask Leanne or ask somebody else and know I'm going to get an answer that's not being judged. So I feel like sometimes it's like, you might have a Black friend, but you might not even feel like you can ask that particular friend because of their character or their demeanour. So for anyone that's like that, that's watching, that has any questions about Blackness or how to be a better ally to the Black community, we'll make sure that when this is live, we've got a box on our Insta story where you can ask questions, and we'll make sure we take the time out to respond. So you've got that opportunity too.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say, that for anyone watching, if any questions haven't been answered, like Roshan said, please do head to their page. Everything is going to be tagged in the caption to this video. So thank you to the Dope Black Women. Thanks to Rachel. And thank you for everyone for watching. And let's continue this conversation because it needs to be happening.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.